This is the history of the Irish in Kansas City, brought to you by the Irish Roots Cafe, part of our series on the Irish in America.
I am the director of the Marr Sound Archives, which is a collection of 300,000 sound recordings. And the McDowells were based out of Belfast, and they came over during the potato famine. Came to Kansas City to work on the railroad. She'd say, You know, you're not Italian, you're Irish. What are you doing here?
Today we talk with Charles Haddix, Episode 2, Old KC Sounds, Lexington and McDowell, When Ireland Met Kansas City. I am Mike O'Laughlin, your host and native son. You can reach me at irishroots.com. That's where all of our Irish podcasts and books and resources can be found. Keep in mind that I'm always looking for a good interview for the Irish in Missouri, and for that matter, anywhere in the world. St. Louis is coming up after this series of shows on Kansas City. It's up to you folks. Just let me know where you want to go next. Australia, Canada, England, California. Call me at 816-256-3360 and leave a message of any sort. Take a look at the Irish Roots Cafe webpage if you get the chance. Find a book, search for your family tree, or even become a member. It all goes to keep things rolling in the right direction. You can surely get there from here by going to www.irishroots.com. And remember to check the show notes on our blog for this episode while you're there. Remember the old families in Kansas City. We'll be touching upon a few each episode. And coming up in future shows, there's going to be things like Peter Adams and the history of Kansas City, Kansas. Pete Marr, editor and publisher of Kansas City's Irish newspaper, and many, many more. The website of the week is irishmuseum.org. That's from the folks down at Union Station where we recorded today's show, the Irish Museum. Our thanks to Rachel Casey for letting us use the facilities. Well, let's give a couple of books of the week. For those of you interested in the Pendergast days, here's another one. Last week we had Tomstown. This week there's a little paperback, about 162 pages. I've got the 1972 printing, entitled The Pendergast Machine by Lyle W. Dorset. And then, considering we're talking a little bit about music, 'Twas Only an Irishman's Dream is the name of the second book, and that talks about the early history of Irish and music in America and gives a lot of the early Irish sheet music with commentary. And, of course, Kansas City Jazz by Chuck Haddix, our guest for the day. Now let's get back to it. Here is our interview with Chuck. My old friend met up with us at the cafe just a few days ago, and we decided to go down to the Irish Museum at Union Station. Here's our conversation, and I think you'll enjoy it. And we have a special guest with us today, Chuck Haddix. Now, I don't want to say anything, but I knew him way back when. We were in high school, and at that time, I think we decided that was it. When we were done with high school, no more education, no more of this learning book stuff. But somehow we both got turned around. Chuck, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd and let them know about your book, too?
Well, it's nice to be here with you today, Mike. And as you said, we go way back to high school. And it's kind of funny because I think we were probably the two least likely to become scholars. And here we are. We couldn't spell scholar in those days, and now we are one. I am the director of the Marr Sound Archives, which is a collection of 300,000 sound recordings in the Miller Nichols Library at UMKC. I'm also the producer of the Fish Fry aired Friday and Saturday nights from 8 until midnight on KCUR FM 89.3, also streamed on the web at kcur.org. And also I'm a writer. Had articles published in Living Blues, Downbeat, and also co-authored a few years back a history of Kansas City jazz called Kansas City Jazz from Ragtime to Bebop, a history for Oxford University Press. So, like you, I'm a historian and a researcher and a writer.
Well, now, do you have? How about your personal roots? Do you have any Irish names back there?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, the Haddixes come from the Isle of Man and the Irish Sea, from Douglas, and they came over during the Revolutionary War. And then the McDowells came over. My mother's father's name was McDowell. Her maiden name was McDowell. And the McDowells were based out of Belfast, and they came over during the potato famine. The oldest brother inherited the farm, the classic case, and so the other brothers had no way to make a living, so they all migrated to the United States, and they came in through Canada. We'd looked for them for many years in New York, but they came in through Canada, and they found their way to Lexington, Missouri, where they settled down.
Did they stay in Canada very long?
I don't think so. I don't really know too much about the genealogy. There's other people in the family that have done quite a bit of history, and I'll refer her to you. But I do know that they came in through Canada, and they didn't stay in Canada too long because they were in Lexington during the Civil War.
Oh boy! Now Lexington saw some action down there, didn't they?
Yeah. In fact, my great grandfather watched the Battle of Lexington from a tree.
Good.
Climbed up in a tree and watched the battle.
Have you been down there and looked at that layout?
Oh yeah, many times.
Interesting.
My uncle Sam McDowell, my great uncle Sam McDowell, was a good friend of mine and a champion of me too. And he was a horse soldier, and he told me a lot of the lore of the family. And they settled in Lexington, and they owned a hotel there. And recently found out that they were slaveholders, too. They were slave owners. So.
Good gosh.
And Sam and my uncle, my grandfather, David R. McDowell, came to Kansas City to work on the railroad in the West Bottoms.
Yeah, it brought a lot of people. About what year would that have been?
That would have been just right after about 1917, 1918, around in there.
All right.
So they were part of that great migration that came up here to make a living.
So the military brought him down to Lexington?
No, he. It could be Sam ended up there because of the military, but that's where they settled, and there were a number of brothers that settled in Lexington, and then my grandfather came up here, and then he moved to the east side. They lived on the east side in a small cottage on Van Brunt. Ironically, he married a woman who was Velma, who was not Velma. God, for some reason I can't remember my grandmother's name. Lena.
Yeah.
And she was she's always grandma to me, but she was a Baptist. So he was a Catholic, so he converted and became a Baptist. And on his deathbed, the priest came in and gave him extreme unction. He got back to his roots on his deathbed.
Yeah, didn't want to take any chances.
And like so many of the others, they went to work for the railroad, and then he went to work for Armco Steel.
Okay, yeah.
And so he worked in the steel mill, like many of the others.
And then
he was a day laborer.
And then when did the family end up moving north?
They moved north. Actually, we moved north after the war. After I was born in 1951, we moved up north around 53. My father worked for American Can Company and got a job working for them, and he didn't want to drive across the river all the time. And, at that time, there was a real housing shortage in Kansas City. Few people realized that when the GIs came back, they made families. They married their sweethearts, started having children, and there was a great demand for housing and great competition. So that's when your suburbs start to happen in Kansas City. Prairie Village begins to grow, and up north of the river, that area the suburbs begin to grow at that time.
A lot of ranches where you can just move in, put them up quick, and get these families going.
Oh yeah, I'm sure your family was the same way.
Yeah, it's about the same story, about the same time frame when they moved back north around the same time. So, Did you think you were Irish when you were growing up? Anybody ever say anything?
Yes, actually, yeah. My mother used to talk about our Irish heritage, particularly when I was hanging out with Italians. You were probably the same way. She'd say, you're not Italian, you're Irish. What are you doing here? You're hanging out with those guys.
Well, out north there were so many Italians. That was sort of the thing to do there for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was exactly. But no, she used to tout. In fact, she used to make Irish stew and. She learned how to make from her mother, and she had red hair, so she was very Irish.
God. So you knew that from a kid growing up. You were Irish.
Sure. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Never talked about it much, though, would you?
I did. Well, actually, I would. Yeah, I'd talk about it. But also, I'm part Native American, so there's that too. We're all kind of a gumbo.
That's what makes America great.
Yeah, it really is. My father's grandfather was married to a Cherokee woman, and so he was Black Irish too. You could look at him, and he had black hair, and so that he is very, very swarthy, and you could tell he was Native American and Black Irish too.
Well, we got on one of these. You did that jazz book. You probably know a lot about music, and you're at the archives there. I got Peter Adams. We found this old sheet music done by an Irishman in Kansas City. 2 Irish tunes, and we thought, well, nobody's heard these, nobody living anyway. So I had him get up and sing them, and we're going to have those in one of these podcasts to kick it off. It'll be a little reminiscent. But I wonder, did you, in your research, what do you know about the Irish in music? I haven't heard anybody comment on that.
Well, Kansas City was a major ragtime publishing center, and a lot of the composers were Irish. And I'm trying to think about a gentleman that wrote Peaceful Henry. He lived over on Benton. I can't remember his name right now. It'll come to me in a minute.
Right.
And he's one of the great Irish composers. And there were a number of them. And then, of course, you had the Coon Saunders Original Nighthawk Orchestra, which had a lot of Irish musicians in it too, jazz musicians.
Boy, not many people know that.
Yeah, that's true. That's part of our heritage. There's a lot of resources that you can use. Like I said, talking earlier on about the city directories, and also the Western Historical Manuscripts collection has the records for the unions, 627, which was the African American Union, and 34, which was the white union. So you can trace a lot of the composers and early performers there.
I wonder what kind of information you dig up.
They'll tell you where they play. It tells you a lot about them.
And it'd be interesting. You could go to the same spot and say, my granddad stood right here.
Yeah, and if you want to see the Kansas City imprints, they're online. All of our Kansas City imprints from special collections at UMKC is available at umkc.edu/lib. And it's quite interesting. What's interesting to me, something that I've been studying, is racial stereotypes in early recorded sound. And in the early days, of course, we like to talk about ourselves as being a melting pot. We were kind of a chunky stew, actually, because various ethnic groups were made fun of on record.
That's right. But everybody seemed to enjoy it. I mean, I imagine some people might have taken offense, but it seems like it was just like, okay, now it's my turn.
We were equal opportunity discriminators in those days. And it's interesting. We have the one recording called The Wearing of the Green that's on an Edison diamond disc. And all the stereotypes are there that we see today, the shamrocks. And, talking about going out on St. Patrick's Day for the wearing of the green.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's, of course, the famous Irish Washerwoman that was recorded many, many times. Even the song A Long Way from Tipperary, when you hear it, they talk about Paddy.
Yeah.
Says it's a long way from Tipperary. And that's the English making fun of the Irish.
Yeah, there's a song called "Are You the O'Reilly," and that was a song making fun of this Irishman in the English army, talking about how his ancestors were the O'Reillys of Ireland, and they were royalty. And so this song comes out, and I think the Irish sang it as much as anybody else, but it was poking fun.
Yeah. Music is a reflection of the society that produces it. So if you look at the music of any given time, it tells you a lot about that time. And, in the teens, of course, we're still a nation of immigrants or, second generation immigrants too. And we hadn't really assimilated yet. So, The racial stereotypes were just on full display in these recordings.
What can you tie together? Sometimes I think these days when I look around, I go, well, an Irish fiddler. The name seems to go together to me. I don't know if it's a fact or not, but we're going to get an Irish fiddler. Is there anything to that, or is it just an American fiddler that?
Sure, the reason you had fiddlers was the fact that it's portable. When you think about the button accordion, and the fiddle, those became instruments that were used because they were portable.
Easy to get them here, and then easy to pull them out.
Easy to get them here, easy to pull them out. When you're traveling around, they don't break. They're not heavy. They don't weigh you down like a guitar.
Yeah.
And guitars don't come in common usage until the 1920s, really. So Irish fiddlers would go together. And also, if you look at the way the Ozarks was settled, too, and you think about Ozark fiddler, too, by extension, and if you look at the way the Ozarks were settled, they were settled during the first waves of immigration, and then subsequent generations passed over that area, so they remain pure. Like, for example, we have here in Missouri, we don't wash our clothes, we wash our clothes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of fiddlers. The Ozarks is known for producing fiddlers. And where do you think those fiddlers came from originally? From Ireland.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, but I never heard anybody say it.
Yeah.
That would have been that's a good story to follow up on someday. That'd take some work, though, wouldn't it?
Well, you can trace the themes in American music back to Ireland and Scotland, and
some
that
of
whole
the tunes were renamed.
Yeah.
You'd have an Irish tune and they'd rename it with American lyrics.
Right. It's like, for example, the St. James Infirmary, which was originally known as Gambler Blues, was published here in Kansas City by a guy named Phil Baxter.
Goodness.
And then it was recorded by George E. Lee, and that goes back to the English tradition. There's so many of those that you can trace back.
Danny Boy.
Yeah, Danny Boy, same way.
The tune was around for a long time, but the guy's brother that finally put the lyrics to it, his sister, it was in like Colorado in the mines, and she heard these guys singing this song and wrote back to him, and then he ended up putting new words to the old tune, and it became Danny Boy, and now it's the Irish song for who knows how many years. I mean, if it's not a tearjerker, nothing is. Late at night in a pub on your fifth glass of Guinness.
Exactly. When you think about that, and the theme of death and of fate, is embodied in that song.
Well, that's right. Yeah, you listen to it, and it's sad. So many songs are sad, and you listen to it, and you don't really know where it's coming from, but you can feel it.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Irish music traditions here in town, as near as I can tell, have not been well documented, unfortunately. They weren't recorded, in terms of the pure folk style that we know today.
Well, that'd make sense. They probably just sort of quietly went away as the new ways came in, the new songs, the new sounds, and they became American so quick.
I think immigrants in those days, immigrants really wanted to be American. They wanted to assimilate.
My grandfather said, visitors come over to the parlor on my mom's side of the family, and she remembers him saying, "We're in America now, speak English." Mm-hmm. And it was and that stuck with her, too, because she remembered it. And, of course, coming down to me, I had no idea what Gaelic was when I was growing up or, at all. So it just took one generation to disappear.
Yeah, and, an aspect of Kansas City history that I dipped into in my book that I find fascinating, and that is the rise of power. Irish rise to power in Kansas City. And, you had the factions, you had the various factions, of course, the Goats headed by Tom Pendergast and the Rabbits by Joe Shannon. And there were there was the Jeffersonian Democratic Club. It wasn't there were a lot of warring, almost like clans here.
Yeah, like back in Ireland.
Yeah, but like back in Ireland, they divvied up the city and then they came together on Election Day. And think about how they seized power. I mean,
that's right. It was almost overnight. It started in what would you say?
We started with Jim Pendergast. Really, he was the one to organize it. Yeah. And he and all good. And it's ironic because now with the presidential elections with Barack Obama, he runs a grassroots campaign. And that's basically what Jim Pendergast did. Mm-hmm. From his saloon climax, he workers money, and then relied upon their vote come election day, and ran for city council and was a very effective politician.
Well, he got turkeys out on Christmas and coal to the orphans and husbandless women with children, and he took care of them. And that's one place where you could go to get help. And I guess he helped all nationalities too, not just the Irish. There were other people in his.
It was social economic as much as Irish. I know my mother talked about how the first time she saw my grandfather on my father's side, he was a precinct captain for the Pendergast machine, and he used to visit the woman across the street quite a bit.
Yeah.
And he used to talk politics in the neighborhood, and he'd go around and make sure everybody, was going to vote. And
everybody knew.
And remind them of how they were going to vote. And, and it's funny because when I look him up in the city directories, he never had a job. It was always a driver, and he was a bootlegger too,
Yeah, well, you had to be.
Yeah, and then you had all of this, and of course down on 12th Street you had gambling, and it was a wide open town. People forget how wild Kansas City was during the 1920s and the 1930s.
When they've forgotten how they had to shut it down too, or how they did shut it down.
Yeah, beginning in '38. That's right.
So I'm just wondering are we in a period where we're starting to get wild again? And I don't know.
There's strains of it. It's not by accident that we have riverboat gambling. It's not by accident that we have we're one of the Independence is the meth capital of the nation.
Right.
That women are hanging out on certain avenues, not waiting for the bus, standing on the side of the road there.
Right. Pawn shops. A lot more pawn shops come up in the last 20 years. It's really just tripled or quadrupled.
Yeah. It's that follows, of course, the boats, unfortunately.
That's right.
But it's not by accident that we have those things. I always say that Kansas City is like a elderly lady of former ill repute who just soon not talk about her past.
Hey, did you run onto any Pendergast stories?
Oh, yeah. That's kind of funny. No firsthand, but mostly just from, of course, they started in the River Market area back when that was the downtown for Kansas City.
Right.
With the saloon down there, and all the politicals hang out down there, and they had a hotel that they ran called the Jefferson Hotel, and it's kind of funny because there was an account in the Kansas City Star that's quoted in Tomstown, where they just flaunt liquor laws. The place is open all night long.
Yeah.
And that's where the Jeffersonian Democratic Club got its start. And it was they had a smart cabaret in the basement, and the entertainers went from table to table singing sad songs, and that's where the Torch Song was started. So there's that musical connection too.
Yeah, I'll be. Any other overriding things you think about the Irish with music? Did they play certain places in the band? Did they like certain songs?
A lot of Irish played in the society bands. Like I said, the Coon Sanders original Nighthawk Orchestra particularly had a lot of Irish musicians in it. And that was one of the leading dance bands in the country. And they traveled all over all over the nation. They played in the Midwest, New York, Chicago. And they're one of the top bands in the country. They played the Black Hawk, and in New York they played atop one of the leading venues. And they broadcast over CBS too. So that was one of the bands that really featured a lot of Irish musicians in it.
And then down at the archives, you've got a lot of Irish down there.
Yes, we just received a big collection from Dave Brown, who for many years produced ballads, bards, and bagpipes on KCUR-FM, and he gave us about 800 of his LPs.
Good gosh!
And it's interesting because he picked the best of the best, and he doesn't have just 2 Planxty records; he's got all of them.
Yeah.
And also he collected English folk songs, and so we have that, and we're beginning to catalog it so it will be available.
Boy, that'd be a nice collection. I remember old Dave back when he was with Scartaglin, when they had and then people first started to say Scartaglin, and Scartaglin,
yeah.
And then it just developed on, and That's amazing. I haven't heard about him for a while.
I've got his phone number. I'll give it to you.
Hey, that'd be great.
Get him in here. We were over there, and we were picking up. He was playing his button accordion.
Oh, my gosh.
So, and he was one of the people that, before the revival, he was just ahead of the revival, the Great Irish Revival.
Well, that's right.
And he also traveled a lot in Ireland and played with musicians there and bought their records.
Right.
So a lot of these things are no longer in print. So we're really delighted to have that addition to our collection.
Oh, yeah. Are you looking for anything else in particular, if anybody might have something?
Rock and roll.
Let's bring it into the modern day.
Good old rock and roll collection. But we're interested in developing our collection of Celtic music. That is for sure. And we had some, but nothing like what Dave had.
Of course, when you say Celtic, what are you talking about? Anything from Ireland, connected with Ireland? Is there
music.
Date on it? Pre-1950?
No, anything pre-1950 particularly, because, you had the thing about the Irish musical tradition today, you had these great tenors like John McCormick.
Oh, I know it.
Who was one of the most influential tenors of his day. In fact, he won out All-Ireland tenor over James Joyce, who himself was a great tenor.
Boy, I didn't know that.
When I went to college, one of the things I did was to take independent study classes on Joyce and Yeats from Ed Quigley. So I got a pretty good crash course in Irish history and literature. And I started looking at the music, too, and take, for example, Van Morrison. He's right out of that John McCormick kind of musical tradition.
Right.
And they have what Ralph Gleason called the "her" in their voice.
Uh-huh.
It's like, listen to the lion inside of me. And that's what really kind of distinguished that Irish music.
Well, I tell you, even today, we'll say 20 years ago, I used to go to Ireland, you'd be in a pub, just be sitting there, just quiet little place, and all of a sudden a guy'd get up and start singing. You'd think he was McCormick himself. He'd start just belting it. Just a farmer, just a guy down the street, and he's just amazing.
Also that high lonesome tradition of Bill Monroe with that high sound that he had, what they call the high lonesome sound, that comes out of the Irish tradition too, the Irish vocal tradition too.
That's right. Boy, there's all kinds of things we just don't have any idea of. I'm glad we're documenting a little bit of something here.
Yes, yeah.
100 years from now, somebody might come by and find it interesting.
More needs to be done in documenting Irish music, particularly on 78, because there were ethnic records put out.
Right.
Each company, like RCA Victor and Columbia, had what they called ethnic divisions.
Right.
Where they would do small runs, and it targeted, like, say, for example, Jews or Irish or the Germans.
Yeah.
And they would put out these ethnic recordings. And really, unfortunately, a lot of that's been kind of lost, and we need to reclaim that heritage. It's there on record, just need to find them.
Yeah, somebody put it together and say, hey, make sense out of this. And
Well, think about also how Irish music received a great boon from the folk revival.
Oh, gosh, yes.
I mean, Clancy Brothers are right there.
That's right. It's fit right in.
Fit right in with that, and they were part of that. And that I think a lot of that their music went a long way towards reviving interest in the tradition too.
That's right. I can follow it up so far that when you get back into the rock and roll from the Irish, it confuses me. I'll just listen to rock and roll, or I'll listen to older Irish.
Yeah.
But when you combine it and say, well, it just sounds like rock and roll to me, I'm sure a finer ear would hear the differences. But for me, I'll go with the traditional music right now.
It's nice to get back to your roots.
It is. It's always good to take a rest now and then. You've been surrounded by everything else all your life. Well, any other thoughts on Irish Ireland? Anything anybody might be able to do to help out the archives down there?
Like I said, just recordings is mainly what we're interested in. And we have been collecting in that area, and we will continue collecting in that area too. Like I said, I'd like some things from the 1920s and the 1930s because I know they're out there.
And how would they get a hold of you?
It's just send me an email at Haddix, Haddix, @umkc.edu. Or you can always call. I actually answer my own phone, area code 816.
That's nice.
235-2798.
And then you're on KCUR FM.
Yep, 89.3 FM, Friday and Saturday nights from 8 to midnight. It's a public radio party at the Fish Fry. Also available on the web at kcur.org. Now, we got to get you, man, on the airways.
Hey, that'd be a blast. I don't know if I could cut it, though. I tell you, turning pro is a whole different thing. You know
how to do radio because you're yourself on the radio. I learned that a long time ago.
Yeah,
from
it doesn't
Walt
work
Bodine.
any other way. You're just like anybody else that's scared to death talking into a phone, saying I better be formal.
Speaking of Irish, Walt Bodine's mother, Mary Bodine, had a publishing house too.
Goodness.
And she was a composer.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
I should. He's going to be at Brown's big street festival on the 16th of June.
Yeah, she published Electric Park Rag.
I'll be doggone.
And
I bet you can while away a lot of time down there.
Oh, yeah.
there's no subject you couldn't get into just taking a look at an era or a phase or a type. Well, I hope we might be able to scare something up from you. We sure appreciate what you've told us here today, and if you ever come across another bit of information, be sure to let us know. And that book you did was on Kansas City jazz. From Ragtime to Bebop, The History is the title of it. For Oxford University Press, it's widely available. So it's available online, like Amazon and have it?
Yeah, sure. And the neat thing is that what I was able to do is to tell the story of Kansas City. And so I had the opportunity to go back and research the history of Kansas City, not to the extent that Bill Worley's done it, certainly, but
oh yeah.
But that's one thing that gave me great pleasure.
Oh, I bet it did, and I bet you got to talk to some interesting characters to get to show you the way.
Oh yeah, I talked to old gamblers and
you knew where it was at. Boy, are you going to did you put all that gambling in that book too?
Yeah, the gambling's all in there.
Oh, you just doubled sales. Right now, people are going to go for that book. Well, that's great. One of these days, down at the Kansas City Irish Museum. They might have get a bunch of authors together down there someday, and we could all just sort of check out, talk about Kansas City history, and make sure there's a wide variety of folks. That'd be fun, don't you think?
Well, I think it'd be fun to get Terrence O'Malley in there.
Oh, that's right. We could have a whole heck of a time.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I tell you, it's been great, and feel free to call in any time. If you ever got another tip or you find something out about the Irish, you got a hotline, just we'll get it out on the air, and that way it'll be good for another 100 years.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I'll try and put together some 78s, recordings of some 78s you could play in here about, particularly the Wearing of the Green. It is a real hoot.
Yeah, I've heard some, but I don't know if I've heard that one.
A lot of bad Irish accents on records.
I've heard, terrible, and they think they're so funny. They're nice. Just like being in their living room. A bunch of hams, that's for sure.
All right, Mike's good to see you.
Okay, great. See you later, and we'll remember when Kansas City met Ireland with Chuck Haddix. Goodbye. This is Mike O'Loughlin at the Irish Roots Cafe. Reach me anytime at irishroots.com, where you can find all of our books and podcasts, including our Irish Families Worldwide podcast. And it's all free. Well, at least the podcasts are. And be sure to check the show notes for this episode on our webpage. Donations and comments are always welcome. And a big thank you to all of our members who make this all possible. That's all, folks. Until next time we meet right here, where Ireland met Kansas City at the Irish Roots Cafe.